Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of AI Governance Watch. I'm Guru Sethupathy, General Manager of AI Governance at Optro. And today we have a special guest, Karen Meohas, who is the Director of GRC at Nozomi Networks. Karen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe we can just start with a little bit about your background. I know you're the Director of GRC at Nozomi Networks. You've been there for about 1.5 years, approximately, if that's correct. So if you can just tell me a bit about your role and about Nozomi as well.
Of course, yeah. Nozomi is focused on cybersecurity for OT and IoT environments. And I have been there for 1.5 years. Before that, I was working at a special project for Volkswagen, the Scout Motors project. And I have been working in GRC for many years. I'm not going to say how many, but for the past at least decade, I have been focused on information security and data privacy.
Wonderful, wonderful. And look, I know we met at lunch yesterday and you had some really good questions. And so I was excited to chat with you and delve into some of those things for our audience today. But first, just to set some context, how is Nozomi incorporating AI? Let's start there. How is it starting to do that? And then we can go from there.
I think there are two different perspectives on how we are using, developing, and incorporating AI in our daily work. The first part is the product side of things. So what engineering is doing to develop and deliver that as value and product to our customers. And the other side is on the corporate level, how we are doing to develop projects, develop agents, and use applications that are more AI-driven. And the reason why it's very important to break it down from a GRC perspective is because the approach for these two different portfolios is quite different nowadays. And I think if there is any GRC professional that says, oh, I'm 100% confident that I know how I'm going to manage AI within GRC, I would question that. We don't know yet. I think we're trying to figure out. I think there are many professionals that are trying to do the right thing, but I think there is a lot to come, especially within the next 12, 18 months.
I like your honesty there. And I want to spend a second on the way you broke down the two portfolios. So I think if I heard you correctly, you said one is around building AI into the products that you sell to your customers. And the other is AI almost as how do you increase the efficiency of the organization, right? Back office, other things, but how do you increase the efficiency of the organization? And then you said those two different portfolios deserve a different approach. Explain to me what you mean by different approach of AI when it comes to those different portfolios.
On the product side of things, we have to put ourselves in our customers' shoes. We have to start really thinking about what are their concerns when it comes to the products that they buy from Nozomi and they use. So our approach has been, number one, looking at the AI regulations, like the EU AI Act. And these, I think there are lots of clues that the customers give us when it comes to what are their concerns. For example, when you start seeing AI terms within agreements, you start kind of picking those clues to understand what should be your approach and what level of transparency you should use. So as GRC, we start from the regulatory side of things. What are the risk assessment approaches that we should use for the product itself? And how can we translate that into how we communicate with the customers, AI disclosures, terms, and how can you create that as part of the SDLC process lifecycle?
Yep. I think that's a great point. In fact, what I'm hearing underneath what you're saying is customers are actually asking you to, in some way, shape, or form, to build trust with them around this AI. And so that requires a different risk management process, governance process, transparency process than how you would incorporate it internally. And I think that's a very key distinction and something we see in the market, right? The way vendors are approaching, right? So you're both a vendor and a deployer. So how you approach things from a vendor standpoint versus how you imagine from a deployment standpoint. And even some of the big regulations like the EU AI Act or the frameworks like ISO and NIST have different obligations for vendors versus deployers versus kind of other roles as well. And I think you're calling that out.
Yeah, and you really need to understand what is the data that is being processed, how that data is being processed. That is going to reflect on how you communicate with the customers and what are your obligations under these acts. This is very important from a product standpoint. How we sell AI products to our customers and how we can be very transparent about our internal engineering practices towards AI.
And this sounds great. Have you already implemented this like transparency and all that in your product process?
Yes, we have white papers published. We have a responsible AI disclosure that is directly related to the AI product that we sell. And we have recurring risk assessments between GRC and engineering.
That's incredible. I mean, look, I'll be honest. I'm not just saying this to flatter you. Like in the conversations I've had with so many different companies, you guys are pretty sophisticated, I think, already in terms of how you're thinking about this and how GRC is interacting with engineering and product to bring this to life. What's the feedback you're hearing from customers?
From customers, I don't think we could measure yet, but I can tell you when we work with legal to review agreements, the fact that we are having baseline terms determined based on the practices that we have, it streamlines the process. Yes, so it makes it definitely like easier, and I'm pretty sure the customers, they appreciate that because there are no you don't have issues like redlining contracts. So, and I think we are pretty good. The reason why I'm saying we are good but not great is because we created this baseline with the product and engineering. But this is evolving. There will be new regulations this year. So if it's a continuous work of risk mitigation. So we have to constantly look at our practices, the models that we are using, the outputs, and we have to constantly risk assess and to make sure our documentation is up to date because we should be ready to answer questions from the customers.
I want to emphasize that point again, right? The point that you called out around how this is a continuous process of evolution, the AI governance program, right? And that is required both because the external market is evolving, the regulatory market, the technology itself. And so you have to stay on top of all that and make sure your process evolves. What are some things that you are seeing? Like, how are you tracking, for instance, the complicated regulatory? You brought this up a few times. There's the EU AI Act, of course. You guys are a global company, but there's so many other laws and regulations. How are you getting your arms around that? Do you bring in legal? Like, how are you guys managing that?
We work very closely with legal. We basically keep track of like enforcement dates and if there are any added requirements to what we already been doing. So we conducted a comprehensive EU AI Act assessment last year, and we created a number of controls that are aligned with the requirements in the regulation. Most of the regulations that are coming up, they are pretty aligned with the Act says, considering that we are not a high-risk
use case.
Okay. So I think that
you don't have any high-risk use cases today. Okay.
I think that makes it a little bit easier as well. I think when you're processing personal information, and I think when you have any sort of like ethical impact on what you're doing, it gets much more complicated.
Right. Especially I think some of those use cases defined include, lending and financial services, hiring and HR and health. And obviously, I can understand why you would say, though you may be using some of those internally, which could be a different point, correct?
Completely separate.
Yes.
Corporate is way more complicated. Because
and are you involved with that as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the reason why I say the corporate level is more complicated is because there are many departments, many people with different demands. When I'm talking about our product, I basically have product and engineering.
Okay.
Focused on one objective, which is create a product to serve our customers. Very well-defined scope, very well-defined use case with a very clear data flow and very clear outputs. Corporate, each department wants something different. It can be a little bit out of control, but I have try to create some methodology around it. We are still discussing how ultimately it's going to be our approach, but we believe that the best approach would be also breaking down AI implementation and usage in tiers and categories based on, for us, what makes sense is the level of resource that we need, including human resource, investment, time. As an AI strategy, there is a big difference between using AI and be AI driven. And this is what we are trying to navigate right now. What are we trying to do now at a department level might be more creating efficiency within processes using AI. And there is a high level corporate strategy to be AI driven. And that involves what are the metrics? Where do we want to get? How are we going to measure that? What are the models that we're going to use? It's much more complex than simply onboarding a tool that already has some AI solution embedded into it.
And are you involved in this entire process of, like, I think you mentioned trying to tier the AI use cases by value and opportunity, and also probably by risk as well, I imagine. Are you involved in that conversation and in that process?
I am. Yes, I am. I created, the first thing I did, I created like a preliminary AI governance manual based on 42001. Very high level requirements, but something that could guide us through AI implementation based on different systems, output systems. The next thing that we did was to create an internal AI policies.
Okay.
A set of guidelines and rules so people wouldn't like go crazy. And now we are trying to understand how we can get the right resources to make AI projects happen within IT. And each department have a different use case and objective. So this is when it gets super complex and it can be very resource intensive.
And how you evaluate apples and oranges across these different departments. One thing Karen was referring to, for those of you who are less familiar, she said 42001. That's ISO 42001, which is kind of the leading, I would say, AI governance framework now. And as I understand it, you've taken that and then kind of tailored that for your organization, for your company, which is, I think, a common practice, starting to become a common practice. Let me ask you a couple more quick questions. One is, I'm pretty impressed with what kind of you're describing and what you guys are driving at Nozomi. At the end of the day, who's accountable, Karen? Like, if something goes off the rails, the quote, is there a throat to choke, so to speak, right? Like, who's held accountable? Who owns all of this at the end of the day? How does that accountability work?
I think accountability works if you think about an incident management process. If something goes wrong, you have like a process to follow. You have a call tree where a number of people are going to be involved. I think the mindset for AI is pretty much the same. How are you going to respond? You have to have some level of internal coordination to respond to any potential issues. And this is what we're trying to do. But I mean, I think it's the majority of the companies out there, we are still trying to figure out how we are going to get that structure. But the way I see it, it's not different from like how you responded to a security incident.
To other threats and incidents that have happened.
The difference is that with AI, you have so many more incidents.
The surface area,
yes,
right? That I've talked about. The surface area of incidents and risks is so much higher. This has been a great, I want to conclude with one other last question. If you just pull back for a second, sitting in your shoes, right? And having been, as you introduced yourself, a GRC professional for quite some time, what excites you about AI and what keeps you up at night?
What excites me is the opportunity to make it right. I think people talk about implementation, moving faster, but knowing what I know, I think I have the opportunity to hold hands with anyone across the organization and help the company making it right and really reducing risk.
Yeah.
This is what excites me the most. And what keeps me awake is AI.
I think that's a great way to end the segment. And again, the point you made, and to all the audience members, right? I think you captured it so well, right? Like, professionals in your space, in your field, in this GRC field, have a unique opportunity to make sure that AI is being rolled out. And you said right, whatever term you want to do, responsibly, in a trustworthy fashion, in a way that it makes sense for the organization. You sit at the center of that. And I think that is really exciting. And I hope people realize that opportunity to play that role. So, Karen, thank you for having this conversation. I enjoyed learning more about you and what you guys are doing at Nozomi, and I hope we get to continue this conversation.
Thank you.